What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude, new haircut. There is a deeply ingrained myth inside modern Russia that the state always steps in when the things get truly bad. That when a war reaches your doorstep, when your house is blown apart, when your life collapses through no fault of your own, the government will at least keep you from starving or freezing on the street. Well, that myth just died in Kursk region. Not quietly as it usually happens with all the regions being ignored and forgotten by the Kremlin, but it died in front of cameras, police vans, and desperate people screaming that they are about to become literally homeless. Because this wasn't about politics, ideology, or even the war itself anymore. This was about the survival. About people who lost their homes during Ukraine's incursion and being told without warning that the money keeping them afloat and at some point literally alive was now just being cut off. 65,000 rubles to be specific a month. Not luxury, not prosperity, just barely enough to exist. And well, now even that is gone. The protest that erupted was not radical, it was not organized by opposition figures, leaders, it was not revolutionary, but it was raw panic. It showed that people of Russia, when pushed to the edge, can and will go to the streets, no matter the consequences. Old women, families, displaced people standing outside a government building, begging the same state that destroyed their lives to stop pushing them more deeper into the abyss. And what they received in return tells you everything you need to know about how Putin treats his own citizens, once they obviously stop being useful. For years, the Kremlin carefully sold the idea that the war would always stay far away, somewhere over there, on television maps, on nightly news segments with dramatic music and glowing arrows pointing to only Ukrainian settlements. But, well, the people of Kursk region learned the truth the hard way. In August 2024, Ukraine launched a surprise incursion into Russian territory, seizing roughly 1,300 square kilometers and holding it for months. This was not some symbolic raid, this was actual one. Towns were evacuated. Villages emptied, homes were damaged or even completely destroyed. Over 150,000 people were ordered to leave everything behind and flee. And suddenly, the war that was supposed to be abstract became brutally personal. The state responded the way it always does in emergencies, with just temporary measures and very big promises. Starting in February, displaced residents began receiving monthly payments of 65,000 rubles, approximately $730 to $800 depending on the exchange rate. Not enough to rebuild a house, not enough to start over, but enough to rent a place, buy food, pay basic utilities, and avoid total ruin. For many families, this money was the thin line separating hardship from complete collapse. And they believed it would last at least until some kind of reconstruction or some sort of permanent solution arrived. Well, but that belief was naive, because in Russia temporary support is never guaranteed. It exists only as long as it is politically convenient. The moment the Kremlin decides that money is needed elsewhere, ordinary people become expendable. And when Ukraine was pushed back across the border in April 2025, after a Russian counteroffensive reinforced by approximately 12,000 North Korean soldiers, well, guess what? The narrative quietly shifted. The emergency, as officials implied, was over, and so was the obligation. Just a quick note, guys, I obviously know what is happening right now between Venezuela, USA, how Russia reacted to this, and many of you guys are asking for my opinion about the whole situation. To be honest, I want to keep this particular channel just specifically about Russia and Ukraine, mostly about Russia and its internal problems and our external problems. Well, but if you still want my opinion about Venezuela or anything else that will be happening in the future, I will be recording these small video messages in my private Telegram group. If you want to join it, you can do so by becoming either a Patreon member or YouTube channel member. The links are down below. And as soon as you do this, you will receive immediately an invitation link. Basically, you will be able to literally chat directly with me, ask questions, not just politics related, personal questions as well if you want, I guess. Anything you want. And so, yeah, once again, the link is down below. We'll be glad to have you there. I will let you know my opinion about Venezuela or any other political crises that are coming in the future. Everything will be basically there in my personal Telegram channel. Thanks so much. Now let's continue. On December 6th, exactly 1 month ago, Governor Alexander Hinstein announced that the payments would be discontinued. No gradual reduction, no alternative assistance, no safety net, no nothing. That's it, just abrupt end. The explanation was almost insulting in its vagueness. The funds, he said, would be redirected to give the region's economy a new boost. That's it, that's the whole explanation. Just think about phrasing for a moment. People whose homes were destroyed are told that their survival money is being taken away for the sake of abstract economic development. Aren't houses with economic development, I don't know. And say if a regional economy can be revived by pushing its most vulnerable residents into homelessness, I don't know. This was not just a bureaucratic decision, it was a message, a very clear one from the Kremlin straight to the people. You served your purpose, you suffered quietly, thank you. Well, maybe not even thank you, just now move aside. And the reaction was immediate. Residents from the Glushkova and Sudzha districts gathered outside the Sudzha administration building. Around 200 people showed up, which in today's Russia is already extraordinary. I mean, this is a country where people are afraid to even hold blank pieces of paper in public, where a single word can land you in the police van, such word like as war. And well, yet, here they were, demanding something shockingly modest, just the continuation of promised earlier payments that they deserved, that even barely kept them alive, but at least did something. They did not chant slogans about regime change, they did not call for revolution, nothing. They said something much simpler and much more dangerous. That without this money, we will not survive. In a video appeal addressed to Hinstein and Vladimir Putin himself, residents spelled it out in just plain language, black and white, straight to the point. Cancelling these payments will put them on the streets. That's it. They will become homeless and buried in debt. Well, that sentence alone should terrify any government, because once people start talking openly about having nothing left to lose, the entire system becomes unstable. What's the response of the Kremlin? Well, let's talk about it in our next chapter. If the decision to cut payments was cruel, the reaction from officials was downright outrageous. Independent media captured an exchange in which one of Hinstein's advisors suggested that the region's male population was to blame for failing to defend their homes against the Ukrainian incursion. Just think about it, let that sink in. Civilians were effectively told that it was their fault the war reached their villages, that they should have fought better, that they should have volunteered to join the military, that their destroyed houses and ruined lives were consequences of personal failure, laziness, and indifference, not state policy. I mean, just this is classic Kremlin logic. Responsibility always flows downward. If the army fails, it's because soldiers were not brave enough. They did not sacrifice themselves. If regions collapse, it's because locals did not try hard enough. If people lose their homes, it's because they did not defend them properly. And meanwhile, those who planned the war, funded it, mismanaged it, and lied about its consequences just remain untouchable as always. And just to make sure the lesson was understood, police detained one of the protest participants, Alena Liskova, shortly after she read the appeal aloud. She was not arrested for violence. She was not accused of extremism. No, her crime was just speaking clearly and publicly. So she was taken into police station in Kursk, questioned, and later released without charges, at least for now. Very familiar pattern, right? Detain, intimidate, release. A warning shot. We can reach you whenever we want, basically. This is what I'm trying to say. This is how modern Russia handles dissent that does not fit neatly into the foreign agent narrative. So yeah, Kursk residents are not opposition activists. They're just liberals from Moscow cafes. They are the Kremlin's own people, patriotic, loyal, many of them likely supported the war even at the beginning, and that alone makes their protest far more dangerous, because it exposes a crack in the foundation of the system, a moment where propaganda no longer works and lived reality takes over. The Kursk protests reveal something fundamental about the Russian state. It does not view citizens as people to be protected, but as resources to be managed. When the war needed sacrifices, these regions were given upon. When displacement became inconvenient, compensations was offered. And when the budget priorities shifted again, support was withdrawn without hesitation. Propagandistic videos about cold and cruel Ukrainians were filmed already, so well, the Kremlin did not just want to play with Kursk residents anymore. Basically saying, guys, now you are on your own, I guess, bye, leave, we don't want you anymore. The logic is cold and consistent. There is always money for missiles, always money for security services, always money for foreign adventures and prestige projects. But when it comes to rebuilding the lives of ordinary, regular Russians, suddenly the budget is tight. What makes this situation especially volatile is that it is not unique. Displaced residents have protested before over poor living conditions and, well, and also inadequate compensation. And, well, guess what? Guess what happened? Nothing. Like, the Kremlin was like, okay, duly noted. Thank you. Kursk is not an isolated case. It is a preview. As the war drags on, as infrastructure degrades, as regions bleed resources, more people will find themselves in the same position. Promised help, temporary relief, then just abandonment. Three-step process. And each time the number of people who understand that the state will not save them grows larger. The Kremlin has long relied on a very simple social contract. Stay quiet, don't interfere into politics, and the state will provide some kind of minimal stability. Well, that contract is breaking down now. Not because of ideology, but because of math. Because there are too many crises and too few resources. Because war consumes everything. And when the state starts choosing between bombs and bread, it will always choose bombs. And that realization spreads across Russia. Quietly, relentlessly, from village to village, from region to region. Because nothing radicalizes people faster than being abandoned by the state you were told to trust. Kursk today is not about compensation payments. It is about the moment ordinary Russians realize that in Putin's Russia, even losing your home to war does not guarantee compensation. Only obedience. And even that, as Kursk just learned, has an expiration date. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Once again, if you want to hear my thoughts about Venezuela's situation, it will be video messages will be in my private Telegram group. You can join it by becoming Patreon or YouTube channel member. You will get an invitation link immediately. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe